Welcome, everyone, to a very special episode of The Buck Stops Here. And I'm Kirk Buckner, the owner and operator of NotInHallOfFame.com. And I am so excited. I've got with me today Keith O'Brien, who just wrote Charlie Hustle, the biography of Pete Rose. I got a copy. It is fantastic. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Kirk.
As I was telling you right before we went on, I think the biggest reason I was so excited is when I was a little kid in the early 80s, for whatever reason, Pete Rose was the player I gravitated towards. And I know I'm not alone. Obviously, in the great story that you've told, there's so many people who were like me. And what do you think it is about Pete that makes him just that he has this gravitational pull towards fans?
Yeah, this is one reason why I wanted to write the book. I feel like in the past 35 years, as Pete has sort of become a caricature of himself with all of his mistakes off the field, we have really forgotten who he once was or who he really is.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact is, whether you like him or not, whether you defend him or not, he is an American icon, one of the most fascinating and also controversial athletes in American history. And I do think that most people have forgotten why we once cheered for him. Obviously he's got many records and many accolades. Batting titles, an MVP, multiple World Series, and of course the all-time hit record. But even if he didn't have those things, or a fraction of those things, we still would have loved him because we loved how he played. And we loved the story too, Kirk. He was born and raised on the west side of Cincinnati, working class, ordinary athlete, ordinary talents, and yet he scrapes and claws his way to the top of the baseball world through grit and hard work and hustle. And while there's a lot of mythology wrapped up in that, and that's part of my book, the hustle was real. And that story I just told right there is one we like to tell ourselves. It's like an American bedtime story that if we work hard, we dedicate ourselves, if we hustle, we can do anything. Pete Rose personified that, and I think that's one reason why we loved him.
Yeah, I think also too, because he doesn't look like your prototypical athlete. So it does
Correct.
That everyman mentality that, I mean, just someone who is a short person, not particularly tall, 5'8". Well, maybe I can do something like this. Obviously, I couldn't, but it was still a great story. What I really loved about your book, Keith, is the way you were weaving on field and off field, so that way you could sort of see really where this was all going to play out and how he sort of got to where he was, and to how all the mistakes were sort of building and building and building. You got the chance to talk with him, and then he stopped talking to you, as you sort of mentioned in the acknowledgments. At what point do you feel that he is remorseful, or when everything was closing in on him, did he see it coming or not? Because he seemed to perform best even when he knew stuff was coming bad.
Yeah, so one of the things I tried to do with the narrative was just stay out of the way. I mean, there's a ton of reporting that went into this book, but once the reporting was finished, my job really was just to stay out of the way, because the story here is really the classic narrative, the classic rise and fall, and the trick of it was that sometimes while he was reaching his highest heights of his success on the field was the exact same moment that he was starting to slowly unravel off the field. And that is all, part of the narrative here. And Pete believed as a player that he would always succeed. And this was like a superpower for him. He is actually an eternal optimist. Which is one reason why I believe Pete Rose didn't have a lot of slumps as a hitter. He was never in his own head. He always believed things would work out for him. But that same belief that things would work out, that same eternal optimism, is one reason why he was doomed to failure off the field. He thought he could do anything. He thought he could get away with anything. And even when Major League Baseball had rumors of his gambling and his gambling on baseball in 1989, he still believed then that he could find a way out of it. Only this time he was wrong. He couldn't. And so, for that he was going to go down.
Yeah, and you did a great job sort of illustrating or foreshadowing. I mean, we all sort of know how it ended, but if you didn't, you would really see it coming. When why did Rose sort of stop being cooperative? Or he just stopped returning calls, or I guess you don't really know why, but did you get an inkling that that might happen? Or maybe it was just too raw a subject for him to go into?
No, we didn't have a falling out. There were no problems.
Okay.
I think I had maybe pushed Pete as far as he was willing to go.
Okay.
Um, uh, but I don't know, to be totally honest with you.
Okay. With the current, you probably are going to get asked this a lot. As we're recording this, we're only a couple days removed from the scandal involving Shohei Ohtani. And there's a great quote that you used from Faye Vincent, pretty much, again, saying that this was going to happen and it's only going to happen more in the future. What do you think that's going to happen again from like all the research you've done and from everything that you know about baseball, gambling, etc.?
Yeah, so you mentioned Faye Vincent. That's the former deputy commissioner of baseball in 1989.
Mm-hmm.
He was the right-hand man, and at that time, of the commissioner, Bart Giamatti. And one thing I did for the book was, interview anyone I could who had passed through Pete Rose's orbit in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And I did interview all of the people who pursued Pete Rose in 1989. So we're talking about John Dowd, the former special counsel of baseball. We're talking about John Dowd's entire investigative team, which included former FBI agents. And I did try to interview anyone who had a high-level position in Major League Baseball in 1989. And one of them, of course, was Faye Vincent. And, in my book, there isn't a lot of, dropped in quotes, if you know what I'm saying. I've tried to really build a narrative here where people are speaking in real time as it's unfolding. But, in one of my very first interviews with Faye Vincent and talking about the Pete Rose story, he was looking around the landscape at that time. And this was in late 2021. And Vincent was worried about where things were headed with the sweeping legalization of gambling. And he said to me in this interview, based on what he was seeing at the time, that he said there's going to be more Pete Roses and there's going to be more corruption. And there's a lot we don't know at this hour about the controversy swirling around Shohei Ohtani. I mean, what we don't know about this situation could fill every seat at Dodger Stadium. But what I can say for certain is that while it's surprising that this controversy is surrounding one of our most famous baseball player, the most recognizable baseball player in the world, it is not surprising at all that it's happening. It was only a matter of time. And with the sweeping legalization of gambling, I do believe we will see more of it. Right now, we're not only seeing it in Major League Baseball, we're seeing it in the NBA as well, surrounding a basketball player. These headlines are everywhere at the moment. 35 years ago, this would have been shocking. Now it sort of feels like the new world order.
From your conversations with Pete, does it feel like he's sort of like come to terms with his past, or is he still in a bit of denial?
That was one thing I really focused on with my interviews, was to push him to reckon with the past, and to push him to let us into the darkness. And by that, I don't mean anything nefarious. I just mean that we all have our personal darknesses, our regrets, our mistakes, the moments that we carry on our shoulders like a burden. We all have that. And Pete Rose certainly has that. And so, that was a main focus of our interviews, is, pushing him to reckon, and pushing him to explain. And, I will say that, Pete did that with me, and he did reveal things in interviews with me that he's never talked about before. But I do think that Pete, struggles to reckon in ways that we want him to. He, in his mind, he believes he, apologized for his mistakes betting on baseball 20 years ago, and he did that in a self-serving memoir that, while it admits some things, it is minimizing of others, and just very superficial in a lot of ways. And so he thinks he's already done it, and my job, was to try to get him to tell us more, and he does do that to a certain extent, until he frankly, it seems, can't do that anymore.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to chat with us. Where can everyone get the book?
Charlie Hustle is available for sale wherever you buy books. It's available everywhere right now.
All right. I recommend everyone check it out. Again, this was one of the best baseball books I've ever read, and I've read quite a few, and it was a pleasure to chat with you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kirk. It was my pleasure.